Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of CookieCast. Today on CookieCast, it's the NFL podcast, Laces Out. We've got a guest this week. We had a guest last week. What's with the guests? We've got guests all over the place. Fantastic stuff. Good outing for guests at the moment. And we are talking playoff football. But almost more important than any of that, this is the 1000th episode of CookieCast. All those various different podcasts that we do, this happens to be the 1000th episode. Oh, wowzer. Before we start, please do consider like, share, subscribe and comment. Leave a review wherever you leave reviews. Leave one. Leave a review. And join us in celebrating the 1000th episode. Right, let's get into it. Here we go. This is CookieCast. Laces Out.
I've absolutely no idea whose turn it is.
I think it's probably me.
You would think would be something that would get discussed off air, but
absolutely not. I can only presume it's me, mainly because obviously last week you pulled the old fast one on me and said we don't have a guest, and then proceeded to have the pending guest that was in the waiting room join the live broadcast. For those who didn't see last week's podcast, I lost the Fantasy Football League playoff final, and the gentleman whose team beat me was just so happened to be waiting in the wings to guest star on the podcast last week. Cheers, Matt. You filthy tramp. But anyway, yes, I'm assuming it is my turn to do the doings this week. So, welcome on in, ladies and gentlemen. It's your weekly CookieCast Podcast Network National Football League update, and of course, we love a bit of American football, even though it's not a sport that people in this country should even really understand. I must admit, the first time I watched it, I thought, oh my, how can you have a game that takes only 60 minutes of actual time that takes nearly 3 hours to complete? But then watched it more, started to enjoy it. And now watch it every Sunday. It's lovely. Some people who also watch it every Sunday are the people that you can see on your screen alongside me, Messrs. Mr. Andrew Cook and Mr. Stuart Woodmansey. How are we this week, gents?
In NFL terms, we'll get to this.
Yeah, what Mr. Woodmansey might be alluding to there is that he supports one of the 6 teams. No, I can't count. 12 teams that were in play on Wildcard Weekend. I erroneously called it Super Wildcard Weekend in last week's prediction show. Apparently, the NFL dropped the Super from the Wildcard Weekend this year around. No idea why. But yes.
They didn't make them all take mushrooms before the games happened this week.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that must be it. Can only presume that's a Mario reference.
Well, I bloody hope so.
So, 6 games. 6 teams will be eliminated. But what we care about on the podcast more is the predictions that were made on last week's show. So, myself, Mr. Cook, Mr. Matthew Hurley in the guest slot, all made our selections. 3 out of 6, and good enough for last place. Mr. Paul Williams, 50% right, 50% wrong. The teams let me down were the Chargers not beating the Texans. God damn. The Buccaneers not beating the Commanders. And most surprisingly of all, the Vikings not beating the Rams. Don't think a lot of people have that on their bingo card. But with 4 out of 6 selections correct, and 4 out of 6 selections correct, Mr. Cook and Mr. Hurley tie for the week, and they didn't even have the same selections. Andy was let down by the Buccaneers not beating the Commanders, the Vikings not beating the Rams, whereas Mr. Hurley was let down by the Chargers not beating the Texans, and the Vikings not beating the Rams. So a half-point piece for Mr. Cook and the collective guest. Moves the guest on to 2.5 points for the season. Andy up to 8 points for the season, but as we say each week, Andy has a little asterisk next to his name, as he did get a clean sweep of all 16 results, or 14 results, however many it was the week that he did get every single result correct. So we gave him a little asterisk. In the event of a tie, he will take the victory. I am still in the lead, however, as I do have a half-point lead on Mr. Cook, 8.5 points for the season. Side bet-wise, Andy went into this 3 points behind. He was on 50 points for the season. I was on 53 points for the season. Now, obviously, the side bet drops slightly this week as we lose one of the selections. We can only make 3 picks each. Obviously, if we have a difference of opinion, we may be able to open that up and potentially do some shenanigans, as it were, to be able to get some more selections in. So Andy had the Buffalo Bills to beat the Denver Broncos, 1 point. The Philadelphia Eagles to beat the Green Bay Packers, 2 points. Sadly, he doesn't get the 3rd point, though. He had to have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to beat the Washington Commanders. So Andy sticks at 2 points and moves to 52, which, as it stands currently, puts him 1 point behind me on 53. I had the Baltimore Ravens to beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's all downhill from here, folks. I had the Vikings to beat the Rams. And the Chargers to beat the Texans. I remain...
No, it's your fault.
Yeah, all my fault. Definitely nothing to do with the fact that the Los Angeles Chargers are just cursed. So, I moved to 54 points for the season. So, Andy does close the gap to just 2 points in the side bet. It's getting very, very tasty. Do we want to just briefly discuss the games at all before we go into the stats from the wildcard weekend?
This is something that from the point in time I saw it to now, I'm like, I've got to keep this on ice for the podcast. Can we all agree that the Buccaneers lost that game purely off the back of that fumble? The game just was done off the back of that fumble.
The Bucs Commanders game is the only game from the weekend that I saw 0% of.
Very much one of those where if you watch it back now, you are like getting to the back end of the game going, how? So obviously, if you know the score, you're like, how did the Bucs look? They looked amazing. They looked top freaking tier Bucs. They look like a juggernaut. I mean, I presume by now you've seen the play where Baker just ran over the Commanders players because they were clearly in his way and he was clearly not having any of that nonsense. Unfortunately for the Bucs, the Commanders also looked top freaking tier. Both teams just 2 dogs in the fight, bang, 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 battling for points, backwards, forwards. It was peak football, right up until the point that a simple error caused a fumble recovered by the Commanders, and the game was over at that point. They allowed the Commanders to pull ahead, and it was done. It was finished. It was over. And it was like, wow. Weird to have that as the scenario
that ended that game, that run, ended the season for the Bucks, etc., etc. So sort of like, oh, I imagine Baker's going to be wearing that one for a little while. But both teams looked amazing up to that point. A scenario where I would have been happy to see both teams kind of go on, like if there was a scenario where they could have gone and played other teams to move forward, I'd have been happy for either of those teams to move on. They both looked amazing. Yeah. A couple of the games were like, it's close all the way through to the point that it then wasn't, and then like the Bills game, very close through the first half, and then just not by the end of it kind of scenario. It was a bit like, It was obviously in the script.
That Bills game was when we were all texting, wasn't it? And Matt was like, "Oh, put it on at half time because it looked like a good game." And then the Bills just was like, "Nah, we've played around for long enough now. Go on."
Yeah, we're done dicking around with this. Let's get this put to
bed. I did think it was quite funny that obviously the Broncos rocked into town, scored on their opening possession, and then they just fucking went to bed or something like that. It just couldn't be at. The Bills, it was mainly because the Bills just completely shut them down. To be honest with you, it was just a dominant defensive performance. But
I think I've covered this possibly off there just before starting. I think the one of the games that doesn't sit well with me is Rams Vikings. On paper, I'd rather see the Vikings go through. I think they've had an amazing season up to this point. I think I'd rather see them go through. I still haven't forgiven the Rams for some previous indiscretions, shall we say, some questionable trophy ownership, shall we say, and maybe leave it there. So I didn't want to see the Rams win that game. I certainly didn't want to see the Rams win the game in the way they did because, again, looking at the Viking season, to then go into that game, to then come out the other side with that score, you kind of have to go, how is that a thing? I think we were looking at something, again, off there that says that the Vikings have the longest playoff losing streak in the NFL. Have lost in the playoffs every year since 1980, was it? So yeah, just
so my only issue with that is that obviously only one team can win it each year. So technically, a lot of teams will have a losing playoff record, if that makes sense. So, for example, the Bills have got a permanent losing record in the playoffs.
Yep.
If you want to look at it that way. Same with Texans, the Browns, and basically any team who hasn't won the Super Bowl. So I think that stat can be slightly misleading because obviously the Vikings have won postseason games in the past. I think the main issue for me is the fact that the way that the current system works, the seeds are complete and utter nonsense.
Yeah.
So you have the fact that the Vikings went into this as the 5th seed against a 4th seed who had won 4 less games than this season.
Yeah, it's a baffling system that I don't think you'll ever be able to justify to me. It doesn't make any sense. I'd like to see it be the thing that goes.
So I think there is rumours that it could be up for discussion in this off season.
Yeah.
And that they might discuss that basically it would still be a case of the division winners make the postseason, but then it's a case of the once you get your 7 teams in, it's then reshuffled in record order as opposed to division winner order.
Yeah, that's
So
absolutely how it should be.
that's personally how I would do it. But obviously, I've only been watching it for 10 or so years. What do I know? Obviously, the league rule makers have their reasons for doing what they need to do. But yeah, other than that, I enjoyed some of the games that I watched. Some of the games not as much. Baltimore, but we'll come to that when it comes to our picks for divisional weekend. But before we get there, we have got some stats to go through from the wild card weekend. Do we not, Mr. Duck?
Oh my days, we've got the stats. Massive shout out to the stats mistress. Yeah, she had she was up against it today for personal reasons, yet still came in with the stats. Something that has been noticed. Our stats are being credited to USA Today currently because they are not being credited to our usual source. So just credited to USA Today. These are the NFL wildcard round stats, NFL playoff winners and losers of Sunday. Credit to USA Today is just how it's listed, where it's not, like I say, our usual source. I feel sorry for these gentlemen because my stats are actually the smallest because these stats, if you think season stats can get a bit long, well, strap in, kids, because here we go. Number one, the Houston Texans, Baltimore Ravens, Buffalo Bills, Philadelphia Eagles, Washington Commanders, LA Rams have all stamped their berths to the divisional round. That is it. That is my first stat. Thank you. I'll take a little bow there because it took me some doing. I'll move on to my second stat, which is with that, Washington became the first lower seeded team of the NFL playoffs to pull off the road upset. Making his first playoff start, rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels lifted Washington to its first playoff victory in 19 years. In fact, Daniels was 5 years old the last time the franchise broke through the postseason, also in a road game against the Buccaneers. Number 3 in the stats, the long-standing rivalry between Buccaneers receiver Mike Evans and Commanders cornerback Marshawn Lattimore was well hyped up, with good reason. The two have feuded for years, but Evans got the better of the matchup, beating Lattimore in single coverage when they were matched up. He hauled in all 7 of his targets for 92 yards and a score. He had a key effort conversion on a 3rd down early in the 4th quarter that extended a Tampa drive that could have widened the Bucs' lead. But quarterback Baker Mayfield misjudged a handoff, fumbling the ball to Washington deep in Tampa territory. Though the Bucs would later tie the game, the fumble completely altered the trajectory of the game and eventually the outcome. What we were saying. Stu, I think I'm handing over to you at this point. Do feel free to take breaks, have a nap, pour yourself a stiff drink between each of these stats as
Yep. Strap in, kids. So, elsewhere, fans were treated to another efficient quarterbacking performance in the form of MVP candidate Josh Allen for the Bills. The Denver Broncos posted the NFL's 3rd best scoring defense, allowing 18.3 points per game over the regular season. They ranked 8th in turnovers forced at 25. All that Allen did was complete 20 of 26 passes for 272 yards and 2 scores, while adding 46 rushing yards in a 31-7 rout. Bills offensive coordinator Joe Brady leaned on the ground game, even though Denver ranked third in the NFL in rushing defense, 96.4 yards allowed per game. That was during the regular season. The Bills rushed the ball 44 times for 210 yards, with James Cook racking up 120 and one touchdown on 23 carries. The Bills averaged 10 plays per series, excluding the 5-play sequence they needed to close out the game. There was one point when I was watching that game, and it was showing about like the length of the drives, and it was like they had like so many in a row that were like over 6.5 minutes each time or something that they were saying. I was like, it passed really quickly. I really enjoyed that game, to be fair.
Yeah, it was good.
Through the first 13 games of the 2024 season, the Eagles combined to score 17 first-quarter points. Over their last 6, including Sunday's victory, in which they scored 10 in the first frame, that number has spiked to 65. Given the dominance of running back Saquon Barkley, who probably seems to get better as the game wears on, Philadelphia can wear down opposing defenses with a barrage of rushes. Barkley, 119 yards on 25 carries, however, isn't the only weapon. Quarterback Jalen Hurts, concussion, played his first game in 3 weeks, and the Packers had no answer for his mobility when plays broke down. With their starters well rested, the Eagles pressured Packers quarterback Jordan Love, who never appeared to settle and struggled to push the ball down the field. The most concerning part about Love's 3 picks, however, was that they came in clean pockets with time to throw. One was a tremendous play by Eagles corner Darius Slay. Another was a misread telegraphed into the awaiting hands of linebacker Zach Bourne. The final was a heave in desperation time into double coverage. All of them came on pure drop-back throws. All could have been avoided with checkdowns. Love has an abundance of talent. The Eagles' defense is well balanced and one that forced 26 takeaways. Love and the Packers miscalculated by testing a secondary that had the fewest passing yards allowed per game, 174.2.
I saw a little meme the other day, and I was going to share it, but I didn't want to throw anything offensive into our group. But it was, the Scooby-Doo unmasking scene. And it was them unmasking Jordan Love, and underneath was Dak Prescott. Go on, Paul, take us home with what has got to be some of the biggest stats in podcast history. Your first stat fills my phone screen.
It's most certainly a lengthy boy, shall we say? So
that's what she said.
The Los Angeles Rams were playing hundreds of miles from home, but made a statement with a 27-9 rout of the Minnesota Vikings in the final game of the NFL wildcard round of the playoffs. Due to the ongoing wildfires in Los Angeles, Monday night's game was held in State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, home of the Arizona Cardinals. Minnesota entered the night as the first 14-win wildcard team in NFL history, but Los Angeles jumped out to an early lead powered by its defense. The Rams sacked Vikings quarterback Sam Darnold 6 times in the first half, including a strip sack that resulted in a 57-yard touchdown by rookie linebacker Jared Verse. Darnold finished the night 25 of 40 passing, 245 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 interception. The Vikings finished the night with 269 total yards on offense, their third lowest mark of the season. With the win, the Rams move on to the divisional round and will head on the road next weekend to face the NFC's number 2 seed, Philadelphia Eagles. Next up, the Ravens. Boo. Steamrolled the Steelers 28-14 on Saturday at M&T Bank Stadium in the AFC wildcard matchup between the two division rivals. The Steelers finished the season on a 5-game losing streak in which they never held a lead. Baltimore's defense sacked Steelers quarterback Russell Wilson 4 times, And Wilson finished 20 for 29 with 270 yards passing, 2 touchdowns in his 5th playoff loss in his last 6 postseason games, dating back to his time with the Seattle Seahawks. Derrick Henry scored 2 touchdowns and rushed for a postseason franchise record 186 yards on 26 carries. Making his Ravens postseason debut, Henry tied Hall of Fame running back Terrell Davis for the most playoff games with more than 150 rushing yards, 4 in total. And my last stat, and obviously it's about his team, so why wouldn't we have left it to last? The number 4 seed Houston Texans are back in the AFC divisional round for a 2nd consecutive season, following a 32-12 home win over the number 5 seed Los Angeles Chargers. Quarterback C.J. Stroud completed 22 of 33 passes for 282 yards, a touchdown and an interception. Stroud found receiver Nico Collins on a series of plays during a drive late in the second quarter that helped give Houston a lead it would never give up throughout the game. The Chargers were unable to capitalize on its early 6-point lead in the first quarter, giving up 23 unanswered points and the lead to Houston. The Texans would go on to score double-digit points in each of the last 3 quarters. Quarterback Justin Herbert threw 4 interceptions, including 2 that the Texans managed to convert into 10 points. Herbert's 4 interceptions in this game are more than the combined total he had through the entire regular season. Good Lord. I think that last stat is basically that game just summed up in a nutshell, isn't it? The fact that the Chargers went in with their quarterback on possibly some of the best form he's ever had, playing some of the best games he's ever had, and it just sums up why that team is just destined to never win. I think it's just shit because they do so well during the regular season, and then the second it's win or go home football, they just seem to just find a way to lose, which is baffling because they should be, on paper, they're a much, much better team than the Texans. So you can't really understand why it is they've lost them. But yeah, strange. So NFL wildcard weekend is done and dusted. 6 teams out. So obviously the Chargers don't go any further. They are joined by the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Denver Broncos, the Green Bay Packers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Minnesota Vikings. They now have their draft position set, and obviously their attention will now turn to what weapons they can bring in to help them with their tilt at the NFL in the next season. However, the Texans, the Ravens, the Bills, the Eagles, the Commanders, and the Rams move on. And they will play in the following games. The Texans will travel to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. The Commanders will travel to Detroit to take on the Lions. The Rams go to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles. And the Ravens, boo, will go to Buffalo on the last game of the weekend to take on the Bills. Now, as we have done with all of the rounds, or all of the weeks this week, both myself and Mr. Cook have made our selections in these games. Stu, as the guest this week, has also made his selection in these games, and those games have been picked as follows. Surprise, surprise, we have all backed the Chiefs to beat the Texans. We have all backed the Lions to beat the Commanders. We have all backed the Eagles to beat the Rams. And then we get a difference of opinion. So, 2 of us have taken the Bills to beat the Ravens, whereas 1 of us has taken the Ravens to beat the Bills. Stu, why is it you've got such a massive tent pitched for the Baltimore Ravens?
Well, this all stems from me taking Tucker in fantasy. I'm not. It just so happens that this year that I also got Derrick Henry, so therefore had to pay a little bit more attention to everything else they were doing. I just have this feel like every year, like since I've been watching NFL, which granted isn't the longest, but we've been on here, we've been in groups together, whatever it might have been, and it's the Bills are gonna do it this year. The Bills are gonna do it this year. Um, so I'm still waiting. It never really comes off, and let's be fair, Henry has hit some absolute beastly stats this year. I just feel like I don't know if he's got something to prove, and he hasn't got the longest amount of time left to prove it. Now it's as I think I said to you earlier today, Paul. It feels a bit like a now or never situation for me. So I've gone that route.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think the main problem is the fact that this game is probably, or this season is kind of do or die for both of these teams, really. So no matter which way this goes, one of these teams is going to be, have we missed the window? And obviously they can't both win. So whoever does end up losing is going to be crestfallen, shall we say. So what that does mean is that myself and Mr. Cook have picked the same in all 4 games, which does mean we will need a tiebreaker to separate us to see who will get the points in the event of that initial tie. Obviously, if the Ravens beat the Bills, it doesn't matter, because Stu will take the point for the guest for the week. But obviously, myself and Mr. Cook will set the tiebreaker in the event that we do have that tie. So we're going to step away momentarily, just have a quick break. In that break, we'll obviously work out what we'll use as the tiebreaker, and then when we come back, myself and Mr. Cook will give our selections for the tiebreaker, should it be required. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Yes, indeed. The break is over. So, it's been discussed off air, obviously. My suggestion for the tiebreaker, which I believe is exactly the same as it was this time last year when we had a tiebreaker situation. Across the 4 games, myself and Mr. Cook will tot up what we think the total points would be in each game, and then give an overall number as to what we think the total points will be over the course of the 4 games combined, and whoever is the closest, the total number of points scored, would have the tiebreak. Sound doable? Okay. So, we now need to work out what we think will be the score in each of the 4 games and add it all together. So, doing a little bit of thinking out loud, so we're not creating a lot of dead air, as it would be on the podcast. So first up is Texans Chiefs.
Okay, I would like to make a bold prediction that I would like to be recorded.
Oh, you heard it first.
So it's almost as if we had a means of recording this bold prediction and putting it out into the world. Here's my bold prediction. I'm going to say that the Texans-Chiefs game will be close. So close that one of 2 things I think will happen. Either going into the last few minutes, it looks like there's a possibility of it going to overtime, or it actually goes to overtime. If it goes to overtime, the Chiefs will then win it and put it to bed. If it doesn't go to overtime, it will be very close and the Chiefs will win. If you would like my reasoning behind this, I believe that the Texans-Chiefs game is probably the one that people are going to care about the absolute least, because Hands up if you think the Texans are beating the Chiefs. It's a formality. So much so that it's almost not going to be worth watching. Unless there's, I don't know, some sort of like drama all the way through the game, right to the very end. So my prediction is that this game goes point for point, backwards and forwards, and almost ends up going overtime. Now, another thing to highlight here is I'm pretty sure there was a stat earlier in the season about Chiefs games either going to overtime or nearly going to overtime. So that's part of the reason that I base this bold, some would say.
So, do you have a figure in mind?
I do.
And that figure is
256.
250 or 256?
256. It is here on my calculator with my workings out.
So, I've gone slightly under that. And if that comes through, but I've gone for 231, and that is my individual points scored by each team at the top.
We should get a little screen grab of that and try and tick it off.
I've even gone for the Ravens-Bills game to be settled by a touchdown scored in overtime. So,
I love it.
So that is the predictions section bit sorted. So that just leaves the side bet to go through. Now, obviously, because myself and Andy have picked all 4 games the exact same way, there is only 2 teams each that we can take from this. So, with Andy being still behind in the overall game, I will give him the opportunity to either take the first selection or for myself to take the first selection and then allow him to take the next 2 selections. Which would you prefer to do?
I'm just playing points at this point in time by taking the Chiefs to decimate the Texans in some way, shape, or form, whether that's 1,000,000 to nothing or whether that's just beating them just before overtime kicked in.
Okay. In that case, then I'll take the Lions. And do I feel more confident about the Bills beating the Ravens or the Eagles beating the Rams?
No.
Well, we know which Paul's head is saying here.
Yeah, this is the thing. I've got to play this one sensibly though. Do I just go with? I mean, I think that I do think that the Eagles and the Bills will both win, but which am I more confident?
Little spoiler for the people that aren't watching it on YouTube. Paul's eyes are currently darting slightly from side to side, and what that means is inside his head, it's going "fuck the Ravens" is what it's currently doing.
No, I would never say such a thing. I'm going to take the coward's way out, and I'm going to pick the Eagles.
I fully believe that both of these games are potentially the upset games. I would argue and could go back in time over the course of many weeks and say ultimately this season has all just been leading to the Super Bowl we kind of all knew we were getting many weeks ago. So it's almost like these games are a formality down to it almost doesn't matter who wins these games. They're just the other team that turns up next week to play against the team that's going to the Super Bowl. I kind of have to go heart over head on this one and take the Bills because obviously I have predicted the Bills to win. I fully expect that this could be the upset game, and I fully expect, like Stu was saying earlier, year in, year out, the Bills are going to do it this year, the Bills are going to do it this year, the Bills are going to do it this year. Oh, the Bills have not done it. It's year in, year out. It's the same story. They're absolutely capable of making it to the playoffs. We know that much. Weirdly, though, you can say the same about the Ravens. And as we've got 4 games to pick from, there's an upset in there somewhere. There's a doozy in there somewhere. So it could quite easily be this. And when the Ravens beat the Bills by 40 points, we'll know what the answer was. But I would take the Bills to beat the Ravens, please.
Marvellous. So, to clarify, obviously there's only 4 games, so it's not going to take us that long. To clarify, Andy's 2 teams in the side bet this week are the Chiefs to beat the Texans and the Bills to beat the Ravens, whereas I've gone 2 middle game. I've gone for the Lions to beat the Commanders and the Eagles to beat the Rams. From a time perspective on when those games will be played, let's have a look. So, obviously over in the UK we get the games skewed. So it technically shows that 1 game is played on the Saturday and the remaining 3 games are played on the Sunday. But obviously, Houston versus Kansas City kicks off at 9:30 p.m. UK time, and Washington versus Detroit kicks off at 1 a.m. UK time. Then we've got the Rams and the Eagles is at 8 p.m. and the Baltimore Ravens at the Buffalo Bills is at 11:30 p.m. So
yeah, it's gonna be weird having that first Sunday where you're not sitting down at 6.
yeah, it's going to be strange. So one final question will be for the guest. So, Mr. Woodmansey, if you were given a shiny 50p piece, and someone said to you,
him a pound. Wow.
because we're cheap here at the podcast, Andrew.
Yorkshire, isn't it? Yorkshire.
You're given that 50p piece, you can either put it on the Chiefs and Bills as a double, or the Lions and Eagles as a double. Which would you have the most? Which would you think would be the one you'd be most confident about? I think I know, based on the fact that you've picked one of the opposite teams to this too. But I will just get clarification.
Yeah, I've got to stand by my own sort of belief, I guess, in that regard. So I will be going not with the Bills, basically.
So your pick would, well, I say pick, but your reasoning would be Lions, Eagles, and the fact that you think the Bills will not beat the Ravens, which I think is fair enough. I think it is the hardest game to call. Personally, of the 4, I think the Bills and the Ravens are probably. You could argue we're looking at possibly the 2 strongest teams left in the entire field, which is a shame that one of them's going to go home. Not as much as a shame, obviously, if it's the Ravens, but you know, personal preferences aside.
Paul, on the doll, can you show us where the Ravens touched you? Because
Oh, I don't need to show you on the doll, mate. It's even though obviously I'm not from there, the fact that I've adopted the Cleveland Browns as my team means that the Baltimore Ravens, for want of a better phrase, can go fuck themselves.
so much hatred.
Well, they shouldn't exist as a franchise.
No, they
should
shouldn't.
still be the Cleveland Browns. And the fact that the Cleveland Browns were ripped from Cleveland and then 5 years later the team that was in Cleveland won a Super Bowl.
Was it them that moved in the middle of the night?
No, that was strange enough. That was the team that was in Baltimore. That was the Colts when they moved to Indianapolis.
Just in the middle of the night, like go.
Yeah, so it's like, shh. Yeah, not thinking that there was just this massive like set of trucks that were just going to be like hauling us down the road.
But when you said it like that, in my head there was like 50 odd big burly men carrying a bag each, just sneaking down the road. Like,
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the NFL divisional round predictions preview done and dusted. Thank you, as always, to Mr. Woodmansey for coming on the show and joining us as the guest this week. Obviously, and thank you to you, the listeners. If this is your first time here, if you just stumbled across the podcast and you wanted to listen because you like the NFL, please, by all means, think about showing a little subscribe, a little love to the channel, clicking on that subscribe button. It's not just NFL that we do around here. We also have a weekly football podcast where we go through the ins, outs, ups and downs of Middlesbrough, my team, Hull City, Mr. Woodmansey's team, and Nottingham Forest, our other football-based friend, his team. We go through those teams and we discuss just why we allow them to ruin our weekends, as it turns out most times. We also, if wrestling is something that you find yourself interested in, and let's be honest, now that it's available on certain streaming platforms, I would imagine there's a lot of people that are thinking, "Ooh, wrestling! I haven't watched that since I was a lot younger. Let's see. Let's just see what The Rock's doing these days, because he's probably still in it, right? I mean, he was only wrestling about 25 years ago, but he's probably still wrestling. And any other year, you would have been massively incorrect. But for some reason, as he's now a board member, he's on it all the time, sort of. But yes,
I'm sure he is bored with the lack of films to star in.
You missed a key word out of that sentence. Good films.
Yes, so each month we take a look ahead to the premium live event that will be upcoming. We make our predictions, we go through some of the news, lovely stuff. And then, of course, the jewel in the crown, as we always say, the leader of the network, the podcast network, Mr. Andrew Cook, provides you with the Darkest Timeline podcast, which is once a week. He will spew forth some musings, as it were, going on in his head. Very much well worth a listen or watch if you're watching us on YouTube. So that's what's available on the network. Like I said before, if you're new around here, maybe throw us a little subscribe to the channel. We very much appreciate it. Join us again next week, where we will go through the divisional round of games. We'll salute the 4 fallen teams, and we will look ahead to the NFL Championship Sunday. We'll have the NFC and AFC title games, which will determine the 2 teams that will be in the Super Bowl. Just before we go, just on me, I'll just double check back to the start of the season when we all made our Super Bowl season 1 predictions and see who was fallen by the wayside. We only actually lost one more person this week. It was Mr. Matthew Moore. Sadly, his Green Bay Packers Buffalo Bills prediction is no longer on the cards. I can still get mine that I predicted at the start of the season, Detroit versus Houston, although wouldn't be surprised if that falls by the wayside. Very first game on Saturday. And Mark and Tony can both get Detroit versus Kansas City that they picked way back when. So, like I say, another week done and dusted. Thank you very much for joining us. Join us again next week, where we will go through all of that jazz and much, much more. But until then, thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves. Keep an eye out for each other. And we will see you all next week. That's bye for now.
So there we go. What do you think of that? The 1000th episode. 1,000 times we've done this in a variety of different ways. Thank you for being here. If you've been here since the first episode, thank you. If this is your first episode, thank you. Before you leave us, please do consider like, share, subscribe and comment. Leave a review where you can leave a review. And check out the website, thecookiecast.com. There we've got social media links and an email button. And that way you can get in touch with us. That is it for the 1000th episode. Join us for another one and another 1000. Fingers crossed. Till next time, I'm going to say bye, and I'll see you then.
Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode of CookieCast, please like, share and subscribe.